The Princess Witch. Chapter 1. The Princess, the Book, and an Education. Once upon a time, in a kingdom not too far away, but further away than you might think, there lived a young girl whose only heart's desire was to be a witch. Now, most little girls at some point in their lives dream of being a princess and living in a fairy-tale castle. Yet this young girl already was a princess, and while the castle she lived in wasn't especially fancy or fairy-tale, it was a castle, even if a bit drafty. And while it's also true that this young girl was tormented by a meddlesome older sister and troubled by a loving but rather eccentric father, what's important to remember is that the girl we're talking about was an honest-to-goodness princess who'd rather hated being so. "Abracadabra!" cried the evil witch, pointing a gnarled and crooked wand at a dress which lay spread across the bed. "I command you by this wand to cause the bearer to be ugly." Nothing happened. "Oh, drat," she muttered to herself. Raising the wand, which looked suspiciously like a bent twig, she aimed it again at the dress and yelled, "Presto changeo!" And again nothing happened. As the witch glared down at the dress from the stool on which she was standing, a large green wart with a hair sticking out of its middle began slowly sliding down the side of her nose, leaving in its wake a trail of fair, rosy skin on what was otherwise a face which was hued a rather ghastly gray color. Jumping down from the stool, she threw the wand into the fireplace, set in the wall where it joined a stack of similar-looking twig-like wands. "Fine," she muttered. "Isabel can go to her stupid party and meet her stupid prince and wear her stupid dress as it is." Picking up the gown from the bed, the witch stuffed it into a cloth patchwork bag, stomped over to the door, and throwing it out, cried, "Mimsy, I'm done pressing Izzy's dress." Slamming and locking the door behind her, the witch stamped over to her dresser, and dropping onto the chair in front of a vanity mirror, began a transformation. First off went a wig of coarse black hair, followed by the removal of an elongated and plasticized nose. Picking up a pumice stone, the ghastly gray color of her skin was scrubbed away. Next went the fake eyelashes which she had borrowed, as she thought of it, from her older sister, a rather large amount of mascara and eyeliner, black nail polish, blood-red lipstick, and a judiciously placed beauty mark. When all was said and done, what had once been a rather hideous, albeit silly-looking witch, was replaced by a young girl. She had shoulder-length dark blonde hair, high cheekbones, a pert mouth, and an upturned nose, sprayed with a dollop of freckles. "Princess!" thundered a voice outside her door. "Unlock this door at once!" Slowly walking away from the dresser, the girl made her way to the door, and, releasing the latch, was pushed aside as the heavy wooden door swung open, revealing a stout and buxom woman who was most evidently not pleased, judging by the color of her face and the scowl she bore. "Princess, are ye daft, lass? What in heaven's sake have ye done to your poor sister's gown?" cried out the woman. "Mimsy, you told me to press it, don't you remember?" asked the girl, backing away towards the fireplace and covering the stack of twig wands from the eyesight of the irritated woman. "Aye, Princess, I told you to press and clean it, not to mutilate the poor thing," the woman replied. "Whatever did you do to it? Were you trying to cast more of your misbegotten spells?" "Oh, Mimsy," cried the girl as she ran into the woman's arms, "I'm so sorry. I just tried to do a little tiny spell, but it didn't work, so I tried a potion, but that only left a stain, so I tried another spell, and then another potion, and then—" holding the girl against her ample bosom. "Och, Laura, dearie, you're quite the fright ye are," the woman said. "You know that your poor father, King Harold, can barely afford one such dress for your sister, let alone a replacement. And may the saints preserve us when your sister finds out what happened." Izzy can take her stupid dress and stuff it," mumbled the girl, as she buried her face deeper into the woman's arms. "You're quite the puzzlement, lass," murmured Mimsy, as she stroked Laura's hair. "Methinks there's a wee bit too much of your mother in ye, for the good Lord knows you drive us all to madness." "Really, Mimsy?" cried the girl, pulling away. "Am I really like my mother?" "Dear child, it's not my place to be telling tales, but I remember your mother when she was a wee sprite like ye, and not only are you the spitting image of her, but you're just as difficult and troublesome as she ever was." "Were we really that bad, Mimsy?" asked the girl, her eyes filling with tears. "Ah, hush, lassie," replied the woman, as she drew Laura back into her arms. "I loved your mum as much as I love ye, and to give ye proof, I'm going to take this wretched excuse of a gown back downstairs and try to repair the damage your spells and sorcery have done upon it." "Mimsy, you're the best!" exclaimed the girl. "Aye, lass, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But I do know ye better clean up this room, hide your sorceress entrapments afore your father sees them, and truly avoid your sister ere I have a chance to fix the devilment you've done upon this dress." With a half-hidden smile on her face, the woman left the room. "Oh, well," said the girl to herself, "I may as well do as Mimsy said," as she knelt beside the fireplace and began breaking up the wands into kindling. "But what she doesn't realize, drat it, is that I am going to be a witch, just like my mother was." Throwing the broken pieces of twigs back into the fireplace, Laura walked over to her dresser and sat in front of the mirror, carefully reaching underneath the table until her fingers found a small clasp at the back of the underside. Pressing it gently and leaning away, a narrow wooden drawer slid out, revealing inside a small book. Quickly glancing over her shoulder, Laura stood up and ran over to the door, firmly but quietly locking it. Listening carefully, and hearing nothing more than the far-away sounds of the stable-boys in the courtyard, with a sigh of relief she turned around and looked at the book resting in its drawer. It was truly a magnificent book. Not much larger than the size of an open hand, the cover was a pristine white leather, embossed with gems of every kind imaginable. Onyx and pearls competed for attention along the border, while within were scattered sapphires, emeralds, and rubies. Gold filigreed the edges of the pages, but what most drew Laura's eyes to the book was a small monogram inset within the center: Pro Incantatrix Regina. Laura's education had been rudimentary at best. Along with her sister, Laura had been educated by a doddering old man who went by the name Sir Maester Roderick, although, to be honest, Laura doubted he was either a Sir or a Maester. Maester Roderick had been hired at the insistence of her mother, for King Harold had thought that the idea of girls learning anything beyond knitting, singing, looking pretty, or perhaps even playing a smattering of music, was a bit too much. But the Queen had insisted, and so King Harold had reluctantly agreed to hire a maester for his two young daughters. Isabel and Laura had been taught the fundamentals: basic reading-writing, simple arithmetic, a modicum of history and geography, and that was about it. Once Isabel had learned these simple things, she refused to attend class any more and spent the majority of her time either in front of her mirror or begging her father to buy her yet another costly gown. Laura, however, long after she had already learned these things, and at a much earlier date than her elder sister had, kept pestering poor Maester Roderick with endless questions. "But look here, Roddy." This was a familiarity which both appalled her sister and rather horrified Maester Roderick. "It's all fine and well to be able to count to 1,000, but what is the highest number?" Or, "Jolly well of you to have taught me how to read, but aside from these primers, where can I find a proper book, something with adventure and daring-do?" Or, "Wait a moment, Roddy. I appreciate your teaching me how to spell my letters, but whomever shall I write to?" Or, and this was most perplexing of all, Thanks ever so much for showing me and Izzy the maps of our kingdom. But what lies beyond? Are there people there? Are they like us? Do they dress, speak, and act like us?" These questions, and countless more like them, drove poor Sir Maester Roderick to such a point of distraction that he went to the king and demanded to be released from service. And so it was, nearly a year earlier, that King Harold sat down with Laura after dinner one night and had a chat with his young daughter in the great hall. The whole of Castle Northrock was a perfect example of what the rest of the castle was like. It was big, it was old, it was stone, and it was draughty. Maybe once upon a time it was magnificent, but for today, this day, it was somewhat depressing, reminding one of an elder spinster aunt who had once been a beauty in her youth, but now seemed neglected and forlorn. "Laura, come here and sit with me for a bit," the king said, as he sat in front of a fire far too meagre for the huge hearth in which it was ensconced. "Oh dear," thought Laura, "whatever have I done this time?" "Yes, father?" she asked, as she sat next to his chair in front of the fire. "Sir Roderick has told me that you seem to be unhappy under his tutelage." "Oh, it's not that, father. Roddy is a dear, but it's just that he seems a bit— Pardon me? Did you just call him Roddy?" "Well," Laura opined, "not often, and rarely to his face. But, father, however else should I address him? I mean, for me to call him Sir Maester Roderick is such a cumbersome name, and it just doesn't seem altogether too friendly. So I decided to call him Roddy. It's much simpler and nicer that way, don't you think?" Suppressing a grin, King Harold put his arm around his daughter, and leaning towards her, said, "Listen here, lass. Between you, me, and the lamppost, I know that Roddy, as you call him, isn't the best of maesters to be found, but in his day he was once a great and learned scholar. It was your mother who specifically asked me that we retain him for you and your sister." "But, father," she cried in exasperation, "if this is so, why can't he even answer the simplest of questions? I mean, I'm grateful and all, but, drat it, there's just so much more to know, and yet whenever I try to ask he just nods off and pretends to sleep, or assigns me a bunch of stupid sentences to write over and over again." Standing up, King Harold walked over to the fireplace and rested his forearm against the mantel. Several minutes passed before he said in a low voice, "Laura, my child, knowledge is a dangerous thing. It was against my better judgment that I allowed Sir Roderick to enter my home, but your mother insisted. It was I who told him to keep his teachings for you and your sister at the most simplistic." King Harold turned away from the mantel and faced his daughter. "I am happy that Isabel has been satisfied with her learning, but you, dear Laura," he said as he walked over and knelt in front of Laura, clasping her hands in his own, "you, I think, shall require more. Laura," he spoke softly, "go to Sir Roderick tomorrow. I will instruct him to allow you access to the books and knowledge which you so evidently seem to crave. Trust me, though, when I tell you that all is not as it seems, and that in time you will feel shame for ever having called him Roddy. But," and now his voice grew stern as he stood to his full height, "listen carefully, daughter. I shall tolerate such unfettered education for 1 and 1 year only. Your sister turns 16 years old this summer, at which point she shall be sent to a finishing school in the neighboring kingdom of Tarkesh, so that she may learn the refinements and graces befitting her status as a future princess bride. You, too, were to follow this same path, albeit 3 years later. If, however, I allow you this desire for knowledge, it shall be for only 1 year, after which you too are off to Tarkesh, and 'twill be done so at a much earlier age than most girls." Walking away from the fireplace, King Harold paused before leaving the dining hall. "Laura," he murmured behind his back, "I wish your mother were here. She would know what to do, for you are far too much like her for me to handle alone." And with that, King Harold wearily left the hall and headed upstairs to his rooms.